Hi guys, it's Miss Collins. It occurred to me that you would need to see my arm for some of what we're going to talk about today. So I look very mixed up. And I have my hat here from wearing my beanie all day. So you're just gonna have to see the whole beanie situation. All right, we're gonna talk about 3 types of muscular contractions and then some ADLs, which are activities of daily living and exercises, and how to apply those for some of the questions that are coming up on your homework to make sure that we have really good understanding about movements and what types of contractions are occurring when we're producing those movements. Okay, so first, let's do the breakdown of the 3 different types of contractions. So we have concentric. Make sure you can see that. Concentric. Oh, I hope it flips. I don't know if on the recording you're seeing it, the mirror image or the real image. Hopefully you see it on the real one. I don't know. We're just going to go with it. We have an eccentric. And we have an iso, meaning no change, the same metric contraction. Now, the key word here, contractions. They are all contractions. They are all generating force, whether there's an overall movement or not, they're all generating force. So you're still going to have those power strokes where you're pulling in those Z discs and actually having those filaments, those actinomycin filaments, those cross bridges, right? We're going to be pulling those Z discs together. If you don't remember sliding filament theory from anatomy and physiology, you need to review it. You're about to have it again in structural. And then you're going to have it again in ex-phys because it's a fundamental principle about how our muscles work, how they produce force. That's what we're looking at here. They're all contractions. So they are all going to be generating force. The differences is the overall muscle length shortening? Is it staying the same? So pretend I have like a really heavy dumbbell here and I'm maintaining this right angle of flexion. There's no movement. I'm stuck here. So the amount of force pushing down from the dumbbell and gravity, I am generating equal force with my muscle so that there's no movement occurring. Now, if I'm letting the weight and gravity overpower my muscle and I'm lengthening, I'm still generating force. If I were to just generate 0 force, gravity would go boop and take me all the way down. Uncontrolled, just bam. But if I'm slowing that down and I'm allowing my biceps to lengthen, slowing my return down to extension here to that neutral position, that's an eccentric contraction. The overall length of my bicep is lengthening. So do you see my fingers there? So it's shortened. It's staying the same. And now it's lengthening. You see the distance between my fingers? The overall muscle length is lengthening. But this is what is producing that movement, not my triceps. So here we're shortening. And that's why when you like show people your muscle, you flex your elbow, because what are you trying to do? You're literally trying to shorten that muscle to make it look as big and massive as possible, to be like, here's the gun show, right? Because you're pulling that elbow up to make that muscle pop, right? If it's lengthened, eccentric, lengthened, it's not going to look as big. And if you're trying to show off your muscles, you're usually trying to make them look really big, right? So you can think about it that way. So again, concentric, we have overall shortening of the muscle. So all of those sarcomeres are rocking the same thing, pulling those Z discs together, power stroke, pulling in. When you have no movement, isometric, and so real quick, think about some other isometric movements that you do that are common that you see in the gym. Wall sit, squat. Those are 2 really common ones. Or side plank. I'm not a squat, I said a squat. A plank, a side plank, a hollow. Trying to think of some other ones. The classics, or like a dead hang. So you grab the bar and you just hang and you're being still. Okay, all of those are classic examples of isometric muscular contractions. That's because the entire body is not moving. But now I want you to apply that to something that's a little more complicated. So let's go to the squat. That's why I had word vomit, because I was thinking ahead to the squat. If I'm doing a back squat or a goblet squat or a front squat, there's a lot of ways to load that pattern, and they're all great. But I want you to think about a back squat, okay? I am holding that bar in this position, and I am stabilizing it on my back, okay? My muscles are active. I'm not just loosey-goosey sitting here. I'm not just loosey-goosey in my core. All of those muscles are active, and they are stabilizing my spine. My core is stabilizing my pelvis, all the things, my shoulder girdle, my scap muscles, all those, they are stabilizing my upper body. All of that stuff is turned on and rigid and really working hard to keep this upper portion of my body stable. Those are all isometric contractions because I'm not moving. That doesn't mean I'm not active. That doesn't mean I'm not generating force. You could have force being generated also on both sides. So we think a lot of times like flexion, now the back extension, they are both working. And an isometric, usually you have agonist and antagonist. If you're thinking traditional for like here, I can have both of these firing if I'm keeping something stable. Okay, so in a squat, you do have isometric contractions happening, but it's going to be on the upper part of the torso and in the upper extremity to stabilize whatever load you're pushing and all the things. Now, though, let's think about what's happening just at the hip. And I'm saying just the hip because we need to look at this in a simplified way. A simplified way. And a lot of your ADLs that you might be thinking about are going to involve maybe a squat pattern or a lunge pattern or something like that, which are compound movements. So now take that compound movement if you would like. I would recommend doing an isolation where only one joint's moving because we're just getting into these concepts, and the more simple you go, the easier it's going to be, especially as we're starting to build our understanding. But if you end up picking something compound like a squat, yes, we have hip movement, we have knee movement, and we have ankle movement. All three of these are moving. But let's take them one at a time and think about what's happening. Okay, so I've got my bar racked on my back, and I'm going to squeeze and brace, okay? And that's an isometric contraction because there's no movement. But now I'm going to initiate my hip movement, shifting my hips back and going into hip flexion. But I want you to think about the forces being applied to my body. Gravity is pulling me down into flexion. The bar is pulling me down into flexion. I don't need my hip flexors to pull me down into flexion. Those two forces are already pulling me down into flexion. I need to slow that force down and allow with my glutes and my hamstrings, through them lengthening, getting bigger here, lengthening, that's going to allow me to sit down into flexion. Now I'm at the bottom of my squat, and if I have a pause, saying there's overall no movement, so that's an isometric contraction. And now as I drive up and I'm squeezing and tucking, that's hip extension. So my hamstring then shortened, my glutes then shortened to produce that concentric hip extension. So we have eccentric hip flexion, meaning these posterior muscles are lengthening, still generating force to slow down the bar and gravity, pulling me down into flexion. But you don't want to just fall nilly-willy, right? You don't ever just collapse in your squat. That's no good for anybody. So that's the eccentric. And then at the bottom, if we pause, no movement's happening. That's isometric, right? No overall movement. Are we still generating force? Yes. If you've ever held the bottom of a squat or like a wall sit, you feel your muscles working. You feel that burn because they are working really hard. Then we shorten to drive the bar back up through hip extension. White bag is yours. All right, now let's look at what the knee's doing. Okay, I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit so you can actually see my knee.
Oh, bless her.
Perfect. All right, so my knees, I don't know if you can even see there. So I'm bending. See? Sure, you can kind of see. Just imagine you can see my knees. So I'm up here at the top of my squat. I'm going into flexion at my knees. Flexion at my knees. My quad is doing that though. And what is my quad's primary job? It's extending the knee, but it's going to lengthen to allow my knee to flex. Then if I stay at the bottom, there's no overall movement. That's isometric. So we have eccentric, hold, isometric, extend the knee, shortening. So it's shortening to pull the shank into extension, right? That's the concentric phase. You can look at the same thing with your ankle. So imagine these are my ankles. So we have dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, right? But with a squat, it's not the same idea. We have this angle here. So as I go down, 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 that's the dorsiflexion. And then we have plantar flexion coming back to neutral. A lot of students get really confused with this because they're used to a traditional calf raise for the ankle. And that's not what we're looking at here. We're not looking at a calf raise. We're actually looking at your heels being grounded the entire time. So when you come down, if you ever look at the shank and the foot, when you're standing up in neutral and then you come down and those knees flex, the angle between your shin and your foot gets smaller. That's dorsiflexion. Okay, but you're not combating gravity by pulling your toes up, working those anterior muscles on the shank. We're actually lengthening the calf muscles. So as you go down, the eccentric phase is eccentric dorsiflexion, where the calf muscles, your gastroc, your soleus, your plantaris, all those other ones, because there's 8 that actually plantar flex, but they're all getting lengthened as you go down to the bottom of the squat. If you sit there for a second, no change in length, that's isometric, and then you drive up. So we're going from dorsy back to neutral. That's plantar flexion, and your calves are actually part of that. They're shortening too as you come up on the up phase of the squat. Okay. Now let's think. Oh my gosh, did it just do that? Whoa. I did not know that my Zoom could do these things. Okay. Let's do one other one that I think you can all relate to. So real quick, pause the video if you're watching. And if you're in your house, like get some canned goods, get some dumbbells, something light because we're doing a lat raise. Something light. If you can't find any of those things, we'll make it a front raise and I want you to hold like a heavy book. Okay. Actually, let's do that. Let's do a heavy book. I was thinking you could see it better if I was there, but I'm going to hold my pocketbook and we're going to pretend that this is really heavy. All right, so we're going into shoulder flexion. Okay. As I produce flexion, my anterior delt is going to shorten to pull me into flexion. That's a concentric action. So again, those sarcomeres, they're all doing the same thing. Those cross bridges are happening. Those Z discs are coming together. Your filaments, okay, power stroke, power stroke, power stroke. The overall length is shortening to counteract the force of gravity and whatever weight you have to produce more force than they are applying to actually move your shoulder up into flexion. Shortening. Overall length is shortening. Now we hold it here. So whatever you got, just hold. So the amount of force that you're applying here through those delts is equal to the force that is being applied from the weight and gravity. You are equaling that amount of force, which is why there's no movement happening. Okay. Now we're going to let this overpower us and we're going to very controlled lower the weight. So that shortened delt is going to have to lengthen, generating force as it's lengthening, meaning some of those cross bridges are going to be together, but some are also lengthening, right? They're not all together going to be shortened at the same time. And that's a whole other level. Not every motor unit is going to be turned on in that whole delt. If we had every motor unit, so every single part of the muscle turned on at the same time, that would be like maximal force, super fast contraction. That's not what we want. We want it very controlled. So whatever motor units are turned on, those are all going to be working together. Those sarcomeres are going to be shortening. But we're only going to use the motor units that we need. We don't need the big mamas. I don't need my big powerhouse motor units turned on if I'm just lifting my arm up, right? And most activities of daily living, it would be taking something, putting it up. Like I got some groceries right here that I need to put up. So me taking my pudding, putting it in the counter, in the cabinet, getting my turkey, right? Opening a door, that's gonna be shoulder extension, and I'm putting the turkey in there, okay? That's flexion of the shoulder, I'm using my delt. Okay, where a lot of students start to miss points. A very common one you see with the biceps. We say, okay, elbow flexion, give me an exercise or an ADL where the biceps for flexion, where that's the prime mover. And they'll say a tricep extension, they'll say this movement, because it has flexion in it. Yeah, it has flexion in it, but if I'm pulling down on a T-bar, this and extension, that's the shortening part where my tri is having to fire. If I'm going to be doing concentric elbow flexion, that's where I need to be using my biceps. So me picking something up. If it's a concentric action, the shortening has to be occurring. You have to have the shortening phase. When I'm doing a bicep curl, I have a period of flexion and a period of extension. But which phase of vice versa extension? Okay, if I start talking to you right there, boom, he's shortened. Now he's lengthened. You can see it. The muscle belly gets short and then he gets lengthened. He gets short, he gets lengthened. If I'm asking for concentric elbow extension, I need an example of something like pushing down a trunk. That's going to be concentric elbow extension. All right. Now I want you to apply that to your ankle because that's one of the main areas. Yes, the knee too. We talked about that a little bit, but I want you to think, okay, dorsiflexion. If I'm pulling my toes up, that ankle, right? Dorsiflexion. So not here, but here. When are you going to be doing that movement where you're shortening the anterior of the shank, where you're shortening tib anterior, your extensor hallucis longus, your extensor digitorum longus? When are you shortening those? Not just when you're doing the movement, because like I said in your squat, if I'm coming down in that phase, I'm going to get into dorsiflexion, but that's eccentric. My calves are doing that. They're controlling the descent because gravity and that bar is pulling me down. We're talking about pulling the toe up. That's when these are shortening. That's when these are shortening and producing force. So you got to think about sometime when you're trying to pull your toe up. A very common one, hint, hint, don't tell the other teachers I'm telling you this, but driving. So if you're changing from your accelerator to your brake and you're picking your toe up, that's dorsiflexion and it's concentric because you are actually having to pull your toe up, shortening those muscles and then move it over. And then you're going to plantar flex concentrically to apply pressure to both of those pedals. So you get both of those in one movement series that you're doing on the daily basis if you are a driver, if that makes sense. A very common one though for plantar flexion is just reaching up to grab something. And so that's the last point I'm going to make is the difference between an activity of daily living and an exercise. An exercise is planned. You have a very clear intention to improve some form of fitness. Sometimes it could be more health related, but mostly it's a fitness related goal. When you go, it is structured, it is planned, and you have the intention specifically to address certain components of fitness. And it could be more of them than just one. It could be all of them. It depends on what you're doing. An ADL though is an activity of daily living. A lot of times your ADLs could require some fitness. So like if I'm out chopping wood because it's about to have a snowstorm up in here, that's pretty vigorous activity. And that's going to require a little bit of fitness, okay? If I'm walking very quickly for an activity of daily living, let's say I'm having to go up and down the stairs a lot, I'm having to carry my 50-pound youngin up to his bed, climbing the stairs. Okay, so things are not mutually exclusive here. You might have movement patterns and things that you do at certain intensities in the gym that transfer over to an activity of daily living. But they're different in that my activities of daily living, I'm trying to just do life here. I'm not carrying my child up the stairs to get my fitness improved. It's usually the opposite. I'm going to work in the gym with a step up, holding a kettlebell on my anterior surface to make sure that I am fit enough to perform that activity of daily living at my house. So there's differences, big differences between those two and those goals. Really good training, though, in the gym, the actual structured, intentional exercises that you do, a lot of the really good ones have direct transfer to the ADLs. You look at, what do I need to accomplish? If I'm an athlete and life is my sport, what are the things that I need to be able to do well, to do with fitness, so that I'm not getting so fatigued that I can't do the rest of the things that I need to do? And what do I need to do in a way that's going to resist injury, prevent injury? And if I can hit all those things by training here, I'm going to have a much better quality of life. So think about that. They're different, but when your exercise patterns help you do life better, safer, longer, quicker, more efficiently, then we're really cooking. And that's something to think about. But then again, ADLs, like there's a whole bunch of, like if I'm changing this light bulb in my light fixture right there, okay, I'm going to be flexing my shoulder, and then I'm going to be pronating and supinating as I'm unscrewing the light bulb. Those are ADLs, right? So there's really fine motor ones. There's big movement patterns, like I talked about, carrying my youngin up a flight of stairs. Okay, those are all ADLs. Those are different than exercises. If you are suggesting one, writing out one, make sure you know the difference and that you explain that. And that you're also, if we're looking at a movement, a joint movement, and it's a concentric ADL, okay, me lifting a box up, that's the concentric phase. Me lowering a box down, that is eccentric extension of the shoulder. Concentric, my delt shortening to lift whatever it is up. If I wanted concentric extension, that's me shutting down a lift gate. That's me pulling on my curtains. I don't know if y'all have curtains or blinds where you have to pull cords. Okay, that's extension. And that's concentric extension, because my lats and my rear delt, they're having to shorten to pull because I'm under tension pulling down. If I'm pushing something up, that's the shortening phase. And we're asking for concentric examples, shortening examples of ADLs and exercises. Let me know if you have questions. I hope that helped. I hope you all stay warm and safe and maybe get to play in some snow, because I'll be playing in some snow with my babies. If I can find the end button.